As the presentation loaded, are done in the most effective way and coordinated with other people in the team. And this spans across many different industries. And so what I want to talk about today is just, first of all, give a quick introduction to SketchUp itself. If any of you have not come across it before, give an overview of who typically uses it, how it is used, and then move into what is new in 2020. So we launched the new 2020 version a couple of months ago, and with some substantial updates. So I want to just review those. And then I want to open the floor for any questions. Obviously, feel free to post any questions as we're going along, but we've got some time set aside to go through them. And I want to do this in a very open format called Ask Me Anything. So feel free to just fire questions away about the presentation or anything related to SketchUp, and I will try and answer them for you. Okay, so first of all, a quick introduction to SketchUp itself. It started nearly 20 years ago in Colorado. And the idea of SketchUp, the idea behind SketchUp is really to enable 3D design for everyone. So what does that mean? First of all, it's a 3D modeler that is very easy to use. It's accessible to everybody. And you can pretty much model anything that you can think of within SketchUp. And it's basically 3D from the beginning. So unlike many other CAD tools where you might start with a 2D drawing and then convert it to 3D, in SketchUp, you just jump straight in, use tools like the push and pull tool to just manipulate the 3D geometry from the get-go. Okay, so who uses SketchUp typically? The majority of our users are architects. And alongside those, we also have interior designers, landscape architects, urban planners in particular. So very much in the kind of architectural design space. That's where we probably have about 50 or 60% of those SketchUp users. And those are the main industries where we see SketchUp being applied. And the reason why SketchUp is so successful in those areas is because it makes it very easy to validate an idea. So if you have an idea, this is a really quick and easy way to express that, present it in a very compelling way, explain what is going on, and get buy-in from customers, colleagues, or other stakeholders of the project. Secondly, it also makes it very easy to provide levels of detail. So because it is so flexible, you can create a very big project, even on a city scale, and then actually include very fine detail where you want to. So for facade design, perhaps, or any other element of the design. And thirdly, it also makes it very easy to collaborate and educate. Because it is so accessible, because it is easy to use across many different job roles, it becomes a tool where a lot of designers come together. Also, the kind of educational piece is not to be overlooked. It also is a really easy and accessible tool for educational institutes as well. Another big area that SketchUp is being used in is construction. SketchUp was acquired by Trimble about 7 years ago. Trimble has got a suite of tools which are very much focused around the construction industry, and SketchUp fits right into that. And it is being used more and more as a tool within construction, particularly for some additional things like planning construction, temporary workstations in engineering. Again, because we have the option to look at projects on a very large scale, as well as at the same time looking at very small details within the same project. Engineering, again, is an area where this really plays to its strength. And we also can bring in documentation as well, which is relevant to that area. Manufacturers and retail is also where we see a lot of SketchUp usage, is quite strongly related to interior design, also product design, creating the look and feel of storefronts, moving into realistic visualization. Again, one of those areas that where SketchUp is used quite a lot. And then finally, we also have some applications in where you might not expect it. Film, gaming, perhaps, where we see a lot of big companies using SketchUp to, first of all, design layouts, but also design context geometry for 3D visualizations. So what is actually included with SketchUp? SketchUp does not just have a modeler, it also has a complete ecosystem around it. And last year we introduced SketchUp subscription, which contains, which basically broadens that ecosystem. So we're bringing more and more components into the SketchUp offering. So first of all, it includes the modeler. We have the desktop version. There is also a web version available, which is also included. Layout is kind of the 2D companion to SketchUp, so the documentation tool, if you like. We have a 3D warehouse. We have the world's largest collection of 3D assets in this 3D warehouse. Basically, everybody who has access to SketchUp is able to access the 3D warehouse for free and is able to post their own models. We also have a lot of manufacturers posting their models very exactly modeled of whatever products they are selling, particularly useful if you're an interior architect and you just want to pull in lots of items to build up your interior design. Extensibility is another key factor of SketchUp. We produce a lot of tools within SketchUp itself, but we also invite others, developers, third parties, to take SketchUp to the next level and produce tools, extensions, and plugins which can either improve workflows that already exist in SketchUp, or use SketchUp geometry to produce something else. For example, rendering, realistic rendering, etc. Here we also see Sapphira, which is actually an example of one of those extensions that has been acquired by SketchUp itself. And Sapphira basically is able to give feedback on the performance of building at the very early design stages in terms of the energy demand and the daylight, also bringing in the additional value for the architects who might use this. And this is available as part of the Studio subscription. And as we're moving into a world where collaboration and visualizations become more and more important, we support several virtual reality devices and also HoloLens devices as part of our viewer. And we also have a mobile viewer, which includes an augmented reality as well, if your device supports that. Finally, we have brought in Trimble Connect business. Trimble Connect is effectively a file management, workflow collaboration tool, bringing together different models, bringing together teams, and allowing teams to work together effectively on bigger projects. So there are two things that I want to dive into a little bit more detail. So first of all, layout. Basically, layout is the documentation tool for SketchUp. Think of it as a combination of PowerPoint and InDesign, and you can bring in views of your SketchUp model, as you can see here. And the great thing is that these views are not images, they're actually viewports into the model. So at any time, I can click into one of these viewports and reorientate the model, zoom in on things that I actually want to show. I can add annotations, dimensions, and the other great thing is that this is dynamically linked to the SketchUp model itself. So if I make a change in the SketchUp model and just update the link to layout, then all of my documentation, including dimensions that might change, will all update automatically. So I don't have to go through the process of creating the documentation again if the design changes, as it frequently does. The other part is Trimble Connect. It's a really, really powerful tool that is now part of the SketchUp subscription as of last year. And the idea behind Trimble Connect is, first of all, to bring together many different models from many different sources in one single viewer. So on a big project, you might encounter let's say a Tekla model for structures, a Revit model, and also you might have a SketchUp model. You can combine all of those models in one single viewer and bring in additional data, additional BIM data. And you can also manage teams. So you can create teams, invite project users, group them into different disciplines, if you like, and manage their workflows via to-dos. So you can zoom in on a model, you can highlight a certain area, you can add a description of what might need to be changed or reviewed, assign that to a team member, and then track the progress as they're working through this task list. Okay, so now that you've hopefully have a good overview of SketchUp and all of its components, I want to jump into the updates. As I mentioned earlier, we released the 2020 version in late February this year, and we actually released another point version, so we're up to 2020.1, which we released last week. And the whole aim of these updates are really to address 3 key points. So first of all, we want to make SketchUp even easier to use. Secondly, we want to improve model organization for very large and complex models that you might be building up in SketchUp. And thirdly, also related to that, we want to improve performance of those big models, make sure you're not getting bogged down. So first of all, a couple of minor updates or seemingly minor updates. We introduced new terms, objects, to differentiate objects like groups, components, dynamic components from geometry. Secondly, we also renamed what was previously layers into tags. And this is mainly just the reason to, the reason behind this was to improve collaboration in other CAD tools. Layers are used slightly differently than layers we used in SketchUp. Some of you who may have used SketchUp for years and also other CAD tools will appreciate this change, that we're now renaming it to something that might make a little bit more sense when looking across into other tools. And thirdly, this also plays into the organizational piece. So Outliner is the SketchUp tool, which basically helps, is the go-to tool for model organization. It helps you to manage and organize your components and the nesting of components and the hierarchy of components and groups in a kind of a list way rather than having to dive into the model itself. And we have now made it much easier to actually manage the model from Outliner, hiding objects and visibility of objects directly into Outliner. So from here, you can just select objects, hide objects very quickly from this list view, as opposed to the actual 3D view. Also, alongside that, we've introduced a lot of performance improvements. It has now become much quicker to work with large models, particularly when using the Outliner as well, just to make it quicker and more seamless, again, to kind of work with those large models. So secondly, we have introduced a couple of things, again, related to hidden objects and tags. So on the left-hand side, you can see that we have now brought the option to hide objects and tags separately into scene control, giving you more control over building up your scenes. If you want to run through your scenes to explain processes perhaps, or different parts of the model. And also from a workflow perspective, as you can see on the right-hand side, when using the Outliner, I can select hidden objects. They then become visible as a mesh. So again, this is kind of plays into separating objects from geometry to begin with, to make this possible. And we have also then introduced the option to actually edit this hidden geometry. So you don't have to go through the process of selecting it, unhiding it, making your change, and then setting up the visibility controls again. It's just much more seamless transition this way. Now, in terms of making it easier, more intuitive to use, this is also quite a step change in terms of being able to use your geometry within SketchUp. What we have done here is we have introduced handles on the bounding box. So the bounding box is the blue box around my sofa in this case. And we've introduced the handles on the corners. And you can see I can then use those handles to grab them and move geometry into very precise positions using the snapping mechanism in SketchUp as well. And also one of the key things is that if the handle is hidden by my geometry, so if it's behind my geometry, it now automatically makes that geometry transparent so I can see exactly what I'm doing. If you use SketchUp for many years, then you'll know what kind of a game changer that is, not having to constantly rotate around the object, particularly for interior design applications, and get that perfect angle where you can move the corner of the sofa into the corner of the room, or whatever it is that you're trying to align. So hopefully this is going to be a very welcome change for this version moving forward. Okay, something we have also introduced in the 2020.1 update, which came out last week, is the ability to create empty groups and components just by clicking into an empty space. And again, from a workflow perspective, this makes things much easier rather than the old way of having to basically draw up your geometry. And once you have drawn it, then kind of select it and separate it out into groups, making sure it doesn't stick to other geometry while you're doing that, and remembering to do that at the right time. It can be a little bit painful. So we have made this much easier now with the option just to create an empty group to begin with. And whatever you model from that point onwards will be contained in that group, will start out being already separated from the remainder of the geometry, and making the whole process of organizing a model much easier, more intuitive, but also then working with actually building up the different components of your model individually. Outliner has also not been neglected. So here we have made it much easier to control what you're doing within within layout itself. And previously, the workflow was you would create different scenes within SketchUp to bring into layout and display the model in layout in the way you want to document it. We have now also, in line with separating out the object visibility in the outliner and SketchUp itself, separating tags and objects, we have also brought those changes and that flexibility into layout itself. So now from within layout, you can toggle visibility of objects, you can toggle visibility of tags, and so you don't have to go into SketchUp and set it all up in scenes and then bring the model back into layout, giving you much more control within the documentation tool itself. Also, the relinking to model or linking to SketchUp models itself has become much easier. You can relink models now directly from within layout. You don't have to go through the whole process of relinking it separately. And you can also relink to other SketchUp models, making it much easier to combine various different SketchUp models in one single layout file. Okay, so that covers everything I wanted to talk about in terms of using SketchUp, who uses SketchUp, and what is new in 2020. And I would now like to invite you to just ask away if you have any questions about SketchUp or any of the other components that are part of the SketchUp ecosystem. I know we talked a lot about the modeler. Obviously, SketchUp now includes also things like Trimble Connect. So please feel free to ask away. Have there been any questions that came up on the chat so far?
Alex, thank you very much for your presentation. Maybe I have one question. You talk about friendly integration with other software like Revit and so on. And as for me, very interesting question according BIM technology about a question about export to IFC file. IFC format. Could we save some parameters which we create in the SketchUp? Could we save it after export to IFC?
Yes, absolutely. That's a great question. So we do support attribution in SketchUp. That's part of dynamic components. And if you add attributes to dynamic components, in fact, you can do this with any components. We also have IFC classifications. So you can add that as detailed to any components and also export that. So we support IFC export natively. There is also a extension that has been developed to make that process easier. It's called IFC Manager. And this extension also helps to easily create the categorization of, let's say, the IFC building level to IFC story level to IFC component level, and bring in that hierarchy in a more ordered format, and also export that data format in a more consistent way with other tools. So we do support IFC natively. That's been around in SketchUp for quite a while. I strongly recommend looking at the IFC Manager, particularly for exporting to other tools, to make sure that the data format on export is consistent.
Okay, thank you.
Also, well, while we just to bring in, maybe just to elaborate on this topic as well. So Trimble Connect really brings together many different file formats, as I mentioned. So that can also be a really good way to bridge that gap, particularly if you're trying to collaborate between different tools. And IFC is obviously one of the file formats that's being read by Trimble Connect. And the attribution is also part of that. So Trimble Connect will read all of the attributes, IFC attributes, and you can also add additional attributes if you want to. So that's maybe another way to look into collaborating between different tools outside of just exporting from SketchUp and importing in another tool.
Mm-hmm. If I understand correctly, with Trimble Connect, we can create custom attributes. Am I right?
Yes, that is an option that was introduced recently.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great.
Okay, are there any other questions?
Наши участники, возможно, у кого-то есть еще вопросы, вы можете либо поднять руку, либо написать в чате в вопросах. Я ретранслирую этот вопрос Алексу. Okay, Alex, I think no any question.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry, one question. What is difference between SketchUp and Autodesk Format?
Okay, so yeah, Format I think has been introduced as kind of a conceptual building a design tool. So I think there's also an idea of push and pull, which is basically the function that SketchUp made SketchUp famous. So I think Forward is trying to kind of build up to take on that sort of conceptual design phase a little bit. We do find, well, from my experience working particularly with the larger enterprise customers, SketchUp is the go-to tool for the conceptual design phase, even if a designer then has access to Revit and Formit. And I think one of the main reasons is just the ability to not just look at the conceptual matters, but also go into a lot of detail, and the intuitiveness of how you can design and build up the 3D design. I think that's easier to do in SketchUp than it is in Formit. That's kind of my experience from working with larger customers. Okay. Are there any other questions, or should we wrap it up at this point?
Коллеги, будут еще вопросы какие-то? Хорошо. Ну, в любом случае, если у вас возникнут вопросы потом, позднее, вы всегда можете обратиться к нам за консультацией непосредственно либо от нас, либо же мы на связи всегда непосредственно с коллегами из SketchUp и сможем, опять же, скоординировать и решить ваши любые вопросы. Спасибо вам, что приняли участие в этой презентации. Спасибо за ваше внимание. Thank you, Alex, for your presentation and for your time. And thank you for answering our questions. And so now I think we can end our session.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me here today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the fair.